Welcome to Let the Boys Kiss, the creation of queer ships, where we ask the question, is it queer baiting, queer coding, or queer canon?
This week, we'll be discussing the Leverage OT3, Parker, Hardison, and Eliot. I'm Maddie.
And I'm Kelsey.
So, Leverage.
Yes.
I think this is by far the least known / popular piece of media we have discussed so far.
Which is an absolute shame.
It is a shame.
It's a delight.
This show needs to be 80 times more popular than it is. I don't know why that number in particular, but it just feels like it's warranted.
So do you think it's worthwhile starting off by talking about just the premise of Leverage, and then we can get into who our characters are within that premise?
Yeah. I think this is the one where people are most likely to have not seen or possibly even heard of the show. So it is worth discussing. So Leverage is a procedural about a group of criminals that do heists for good, basically. Yes. They all use their skills to basically help the downtrodden. It's anti-capitalist. It's lovely. They're constantly taking down these awful CEOs and stuff. And it's also got a poly ship, which we haven't talked about. And it is actually the most popular ship of the show in terms of fan production.
And so our three characters in our ship are part of this heist team. And in any good heist team, right, everyone has a role. Yes. So there are 5 people sort of in the crew overall. But the 3 in question, Parker is the thief. Hardison is the hacker, and Eliot is the enforcer. And that's our OT3. Parker is a lady.
Yes.
And this is going to be important for our discussion later. Hardison is Aldous Hodge. He's a black man. And then Eliot is Christian Kane, and he is a white guy.
A white man.
A white man.
So yeah, we're just talking about the television show because I don't think there is any other material to be considered. This is a fun one because I hadn't seen this show when it was on because
it was like the early 10s.
Yeah, the early 10s. I heard that they were adding a new season of it. I just heard talk of that online, which they've been working on and will be out soon, replacing Timothy Hutton from the original cast with Noah Wyle. That we don't know, obviously, how he'll be worked in. Mm-hmm. And I just saw people talking about how fun it was and that people should watch it. And I figured might as well get on board. I think I did this last summer, maybe. I don't remember when the announcement was made. And then I just told you that I was watching it and it was fun. And you started watching it too.
And it was fun.
It was fun.
Yeah, I mean, I love a heist just sort of across the board, across media. So the idea of a procedural, which is also a format I generally enjoy.
Right, but at this time you're not solving crimes. You're taking down assholes, which is nice.
It's really well written. Every heist is super well crafted. They do the thing where you have your setup and then what actually happens, and it's satisfying every time, which is extraordinary to be able to write 5 seasons of a show with 20 heists per season, and they're all fun and different and work out in different ways. And it's also one of these, I think, procedurals that as they went along started doing sort of different and fun episodes. So there's like a Rashomon episode where they're all telling different perspectives on a heist they all were part of before they all knew each other, which is a really fun episode.
Yes, that's a delightful one.
They start doing episodes where it's not the whole team and they're doing parallel heists. So one episode will be one part of the team and they kind of will be calling their other party members. And then the next episode is what's happening to the other party members.
Yes. They got creative with the writing as the show went on. There's an episode that's a parody of The Office.
Oh yeah, that one's fun too.
So it's fun. It's super well written. John Rogers, our showrunner, deserves lots of credit for how delightful this show is. He also is the creator of The Librarians, which is his Noah Wyle connection. And I think a couple other things that I didn't know anything about. So I guess, let's just talk briefly about why they are shipped and how cute their relationship is, and just give people a taste of why they should immediately go watch the show.
Right. So what I put in the outline under the question that we always have in our outline of why do people ship them is they're the best.
It's true. What more do you need to know? So we've kind of got this the reason this show in my mind should be more popular in like fandom circles is how great it is for all of the things that fandom normally does. Like these characters are all set up for fan fiction because they have all of these different things going on emotionally that you just really want to dive into. Because how they ended up as criminals when clearly they are good people, you know, that's the story. Parker has this really weird childhood they start to dig into where this guy who is also a criminal is kind of raised her weirdly. It's like her personal connections are
Right. Well, she had
hard
like
to
a
read.
terrible home life when she was very young and then sort of ran away and then got this
Right.
mentor figure
Yes, who raised her into a life of crime.
into a life of fiefdom.
Yeah. And then Hardison also was a foster kid who was adopted, but his adopted grandmother
Yeah.
was great. So he had like a very different childhood experience from her. And I think he got into hacking to help his grandmother originally. So that's a sweet story. And then
Yeah.
Eliot is the real interesting case psychologically because he, as we said, he's the enforcer, but basically what that means is he's the hired muscle of the team. So if ever there's danger and people to fight, that is what Eliot does. And he obviously has been in some rough situations in his past.
Yeah, he has this whole backstory. I think he joined the army and then he got into like weird, horrible secret missions and doing bad things for bad people.
Yeah. Well, that's like the pipeline, right? Is the people are in the military and they teach them just like how to kill and hurt people as their skill. And then when you're not in the military anymore, that's the skill you have. So then he starts working for these like bad criminal types eventually and feels super bad about it. So there's a lot of trauma to dig into there because there are these later episodes when they're meeting his like former boss and clearly he's very traumatized by it.
It's an interesting dynamic with the team because Parker and Hardison are not necessarily ashamed of their criminal history. Like, you know, Parker thinks fondly of all the jewels she's stolen and
yeah. Well, I mean, she's highly skilled. It's like pretty impressive.
She's
Maybe not legal, but like the places she's gone, the things she's stolen, it's incredible, good people. And how, you know, you can't feel that bad about it. She steals like jewels and pieces of art and stuff.
Right. She's not hurting anyone.
It's like a classy criminal.
Hardison, similarly, he brags, you know, he cracked into the Pentagon when he was 12 and his hacking similarly like, doesn't have the direct harm. Whereas throughout the show, Eliot is still kind of, I would say, even more restrained about talking about his past because he's more ashamed of it. And he worries that even his other criminal friends will reject him if they find out the things he's done.
Yeah.
Kind of a lot more with him all the time.
Right. Well, there's a scene once we've been introduced to this guy that he used to work for who's clearly very, very bad. And he talks about how the worst things he's ever done he did for this guy. And then Parker asks him what he did. And he says, "Don't ask me what I did because I'll tell you." He doesn't want them to know because he's still so ashamed. Poor Eliot.
I will say the other thing I really like, and is a thing I tend to really like in procedurals. So obviously a lot of the time procedural formats don't lend themselves to like any character development.
Yeah.
But I think a good procedural does some of that work. It's never going to be as much probably as a real serialized show. And that's, again, maybe the space for fan fiction. But this show does do a nice job of giving them hobbies and other interests and personality traits, which are very fun.
I feel like I know what you're thinking of.
So Eliot, for instance, loves to cook and is a great chef.
Yes. He could have like a Michelin-starred restaurant if he just would quit being a, you know, heist enforcer.
Right. So I think that first comes out in an episode where I forget what they're heisting, but they essentially plan a person's wedding. And
yes, there's some sort of criminal overlord guy whose like daughter is getting married or something and they need to get into his house, I think. And so they're posing as caterers and wedding planners and stuff.
And they give Eliot the caterer role and he gets really into it.
Like it's distracting from what they're actually there to do because he
Yeah.
cares a lot about the menu for this wedding.
So the other thing that's kind of fun about this show is almost every season they move to a new town. Maybe in like the latter seasons they do that more.
You know, they get burned where they're staying, so they have to go find a new place.
Right. The last season they're in Portland, and Hardison sets up all their new digs, and their front is a
brew pub.
A brew pub. And he tells Eliot that, and Eliot's just enraged because the brew pub is the hardest menu to design.
The beer and food pairings are incredibly difficult, and he's really mad because he knows Hardison's gonna mess it up, when clearly watching the show and knowing this dynamic, Hardison has bought this brew pub for Eliot. Like, right. Eliot is going to be the one who runs the brew pub, but he just is like, I can't believe you would do this. Like, you're not qualified to run a brew pub. Yeah. The show is so smart because what plays just as a joke when you find out about it in the early wedding episode, that he loves to cook and no one would expect that about him, ends up being character development later on, because the more you dive into this, you start to learn there was a particular guy that taught him everything he knows, and he had gotten so far into his like hitman self basically that he had lost touch with his emotions, and like learning to cook from this guy is what helped him learn how to feel again, and then he ends up having to help Parker with the same thing.
Yeah, and so that's a great element in the character building and the relationship building is not only does Hardison buy him this brew pub to give him something to do
and to keep him around, you know, they're always worried that they're gonna leave,
but he connects with Parker through it as well, because Parker starts to realize that the only thing she feels excited about is stealing jewels, and she starts to want to have emotional reactions to more. So Eliot teaches her how to love food, and it's a really sweet episode, and she like touching. Gets it.
Oh, it's so touching. But it's such smart character development, because you have to be smart about how you do that in a procedural, since you can't devote that much space to it.
So I think we've talked a lot around it, but we do have some instances of specific evidence for this OT3. Probably the most overt component of it is, at least within the 5 seasons that we have, Parker and Hardison are a canon couple for like a season
for a
and
while.
a half.
Yeah, there's a long, slow burn to that relationship where clearly they're interested in each other pretty early on, but Parker is super reserved, kind of damaged, doesn't know how to be in a relationship. So there's this slow wooing process of her learning to care about people, and Hardison, like, you know, proving how much he cares about her. And Eliot's actually kind of a part of it because he helps with the process of the two of them getting together. But then, yeah, they are explicitly in a relationship for probably the last season and a half of the show. But then around that time, especially into the 5, right? There are 5.
Yes.
5th season, we start to get some more like OT3 nuggets, because they very much are the dynamic. We have talked about the 3 of them. We haven't talked about the other 2 characters. So there are these Nate and Sophie are the other 2 of the 5 that are in this heist group, and they're very much like the parents of the group.
They're a little bit older than the rest of the group, and they end up in a couple together as well.
Yes. And the 2 of them have history going way back, and so there's the will they won't they of that relationship the whole time. But then the pairings of the show are those 2 are usually together doing something, and then the 3 kids are all together doing their own thing. And so that even once Hardison and Parker get together, that dynamic does not become less evident. It becomes even more. The 3 of them are together all the time, even though Parker and Hardison are in this romantic relationship. So then we start to get in the 5th season a lot of what are the most shippy moments, I guess, of their relationship. So there's this episode, I can't remember when it is, when Hardison gets buried alive.
I think that might actually be in the 4th season.
Yeah. So it's like the beginning of their moments. So there's an episode where Hardison gets kidnapped and buried in a
Shallow grave.
shallow grave, and they don't know where he is. So it's one of those ticking clock episodes with trying to find him, and I think they're able to communicate with him.
He has a cell phone, yeah.
Parker and Hardison are maybe newly together, something like that. So that's sort of the undercurrent. Parker is really worried about him, as you would expect. But what you might not expect is how invested Eliot is in the situation. So there's this great moment when, obviously, spoiler alert, they do get him out.
We mentioned already he was in the 5th season, so he's not a ghost.
But he stays in the grave for the rest of the 5th season. Anyway, when they pull him out of the grave, the first person there to pull him out of the grave is Eliot, and they have kind of an Oscar Isaac-esque hug.
Yeah, again, probably because I was primed from our Star Wars discussion by the time I watched this episode. He does the Oscar Isaac neck grip.
Yep. So yeah, Eliot is clutching Hardison. Hardison is clutching Eliot. Eliot is saying, like, never do that again, man. Never do that again. And Hardison's like, I won't. They're in tears.
But that's not the only time they share a really nice hug. There is an episode where they are looking for someone who died on a mountain as part of a climbing expedition. And I forget exactly when in the episode, but Hardison basically puts his arms out for Parker to hug him, and she just walks by.
Parker and Eliot are going to go up the mountain together. Like, everybody else is going to stay in the base camp, and the two of them are going to go up. And yeah, as she's about to leave, Hardison puts out his arms wide, like, how about a hug, baby? And she just walks right by him.
But Eliot takes that hug.
He just matter-of-factly gives him the hug and, like, a bit thrown. Because in early seasons, Eliot would not be the type to be prone to physical affection.
No. But it's so sweet.
It's really lovely.
So there's probably other evidence and instances, but I think we'd agree the strongest evidence, like the most intense OT3 scenes, come in the finale episode.
Yeah. Well, that's not the one where they're in DC with the...
Oh, you're right.
Because that episode also has lots of shippy moments.
I think that's like 3 episodes before the end.
The finale.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's an episode when it's actually kind of weird, I imagine, to watch during a pandemic. Yeah, tell me your experiences with that. But the basic premise of the episode is, for some reason, the 3 of them are in DC.
Yeah, they were doing another heist in DC by themselves, and then this happened. So they're there already, incidentally.
Someone has basically taken a super virus.
It's the 1918 flu.
Yes. And he is going to release it and start like a global pandemic. Heaven forbid. We don't know what that would be like. And the 3 of them, I think Eliot thinks he's going to have to handle it himself because he knows some guy in the government that asks for his help. But then the other 2, of course, are like, obviously we're staying.
Right.
We wouldn't leave you. But that's the episode where Parker says to Eliot, we agreed that we would all change together. There's a lot of them being this unit. They have this awesome scene where there's a booby trap when they're trying to get into this guy's house. And so they all are at the door, and the 3 of them have to form this, like, Hardison is standing there. Eliot is clutching him to make sure he doesn't fall over, and Parker crawls because she's got all these gymnastic skills. She crawls and is climbing up Hardison to get a hold of the thing that they need to defuse or whatever. It's very bonding. And there's a sweet scene where Hardison's freaking out and Eliot is like, are you worried? And he's like, yeah. And Eliot says, I'm not. You know why? You're the smartest guy I've ever met. And he like gives him this pep talk, which is really sweet, about how he knows he's gonna
figure it out.
Yeah. So this is towards the end of season 5. They're solidifying themselves as a unit. But then tell me about the finale.
So Nate and Sophie, the parents, have their relationship has also sort of come to a head, and he proposes to Sophie at the end of the episode. So where the series seemingly ends off is they're going to go off together, and the 3 kids are going to continue on the work of Leverage. And was it Sophie that asked Eliot?
Yeah, I think Sophie is saying to Eliot to keep an eye on those 2 because he's the protector.
Yeah.
And he says that he will be with them till his dying day, which is nice. Very sort of marriage vow-esque. And then Nate is saying to him, I think it's in the same episode, to Eliot, you never need anything. And he says, yeah, I did. And he looks over at Parker and Hardison and says, "And thanks to you, I don't have to search anymore."
Oh.
And then I guess the other element for the three of them in that episode is kind of, I don't know what to call it. It's not a dream sequence. It's basically just a lie that someone is telling, kind of. But you think that the three of them are,
Oh, that they died. Oh, yeah,
that they
yeah.
died. And so they're telling this story. There's all sorts of narrative weirdness to this, but you think that they're dying.
Right.
And,
So it looks like at the beginning of the episode that the heist that they're doing has gone very wrong. Parker and Hardison are in an elevator shaft, and Parker isn't able to hold on to Hardison, so he drops to the ground, and he's super injured. Clearly, like, he has internal bleeding because he's like landed dozens
like,
of
many
feet.
floors down.
Yeah. Parker has gotten shot, and as they're leaving, Eliot gets shot in the back as well. So they're all in the back of this van together,
bleeding out.
and it's Hardison, Eliot, Parker, like sort of in a row. And Hardison asks, did Eliot make it? Because he's so injured he can't see.
Yeah.
And Eliot's like, yeah, I made it. Age of the Geek, baby. Because that's their catchphrase. And then they hold hands. And then Eliot puts his hand out for Parker to hold his hand as well. And then they seemingly die.
So what a way to start a finale.
But I think it's really interesting, too, in that scene, right, that it's not Parker in the middle holding both of her male friends.
They don't lean into that weird, we can both be into Parker, but not into each other thing. The three of them are the three of them,
Right. It's Hardison holding hands with Eliot, holding hands with Parker.
Yeah, which is interesting because Eliot is the one in the middle who is supposedly not part of the canon couple. Yeah.
Ugh, that was rough. I was watching that episode and I was like, oh no, the babies. Oh no.
Why would they kill the babies? So yeah, I mean, there's more. There's moments and moments and moments. I was saying to you when we were first talking about this, part of the fun of an OT3 is not just how fun they are, all three of them together, but the individual dynamics that each of them have. Obviously, there are lots of Parker Hardison moments, but there are great Hardison Eliot moments. There are great Parker Eliot moments. And there's this strong foundation and interesting dynamic to each side of the triangle that makes them just really fun and sweet and good for each other. I can't wait to watch the new season.
So I guess we haven't talked about that too much. We've mentioned it a couple times, but this is one of these examples of the show was over, and then despite the fact that it's not the biggest show in the world, there was enough fan interest, I guess, for them to bring it back for a 6th season. So that's going to happen, which is really cool. And we've talked about this. I think the only unfortunate thing is Aldous Hodge, who plays Hardison, has gotten another job, so he's not going to be in all the episodes, which is only unfortunate for us as Leverage fans, and great for Aldous Hodge.
Fortunate for him.
He's great.
Love Aldous Hodge. He's so great. I'm sure that they'll find a way to be creative with it. Like we were talking about the episodes of the later seasons where like there would be one where you're basically just with the three of them and then one where you're with the other half of the team. There are ways to include him in episodes that he's maybe not having a lot of screen time in, but at least you'll feel his presence. So.
And then you mentioned too, which is true, often because he's the hacker, he's in his van hacking while the rest of the team is in the building. So whether or not they could shoot a bunch of
hacking scenes
in a row.
It's like, wow, Hardison just is constantly at the house hacking while the rest of them are on their missions.
Yeah.
Why not?
So hopefully they figure out a way for them to still be in a lot of it. Because I love Hardison. I love them all.
He's just great. I mean, really, if there's a moral of the story to this episode, it's go watch Leverage.
Yeah.
If any of this is appealing to you, it's super fun. It's comfort television. And when have you ever seen an anti-capitalist procedural? They're constantly just taking down rich people. It's so great.
It's very satisfying. And it's always so clever, and they like ruin them in the perfect way, specifically for whatever's going on with them. Yeah. They get restitution for the victim. They get restitution for more people. It's delightful.
Yes, it really is. So yeah, hoping for more of that. I guess I don't know if we need to talk about any more beats. Hopefully people are sold at this point on how delightful they are. So we should talk about what the creators say about the ship. This is an interesting situation. First of all, the actors, weirdly, we found basically nothing.
Yeah, like not even just about the ship. Just
like interviews with the actors are kind of non-existent.
Right.
Which is weird. Not entirely sure how that happened. So I don't know. We have nothing from them talking about this ship. Hopefully, when they do some press or something for the new season, we will get to hear more about it. But who we do have talking about the ship is our creator, John Rogers, who likes to take to Twitter to talk to people about his show and this ship in particular.
Mm-hmm.
He's not a denialist of the OT3. So I'm going to read you some tweets from John Rogers because that's how he has mostly shared his opinion. And this is like early days after the show went off the air. He responded to someone talking about the show with, "Hey, we made the OT3 canon. That should buy us a little back." And later he says, "Make one OT3 canon in your show and suddenly you're the OT3 guy." And librarians, kinda. And looking at King Killer, shit, I am the OT3 guy. Which that actually makes me interested in looking at these other pieces of media that he's writing that all have OT3s in them. But as I'm saying all this, I realize what we meant to do at the top and didn't is talk about what an OT3 is.
Oh, shoot.
So I don't know if people have heard, if you exist in fandom spaces, you probably have heard the phrase OTP. I feel like that has made it mostly into the mainstream. It stands for one true pairing and is supposed to be like the ship that you most ardently support. And so then OT3 is just a play on that. It is your one true threesome.
Right.
And you could then on fan lore we got into a whole thing where there are like OT4s and OT5s and OT6s and 7s and there were OT8s on there, man. Hopefully you haven't been confused about that for the entire first half of this episode.
Yeah, well, hopefully for context, people.
Yeah, I think it becomes clear. We told you there were 3 of them. So then, yes, more recently, people were talking to John Rogers about the reboot once it got approved. And so they're asking, like, it's a brand new sequel, not a reboot, right? It's going to be the same characters, not new actors playing the original characters. The article said reimagining/reboot rather than picking up 8 years later with updated premise. And then she writes, clings to her OT3. And he just replied with, your OT3 is safe. And my personal favorite John Rogers quote when he's talking about the reboot says, I have to be careful writing the Leverage reboot pilot or you folks will figure out what my AO3 handle's been for the last decade.
He seems like a fun guy.
Yeah, but that does open up so many interesting questions. What have you been writing, John Rogers?
And I just like the idea of a showrunner and creator writing fan fiction about his own thing once it's gone off the air. That's delightful.
Well, once your show gets canceled, what outlet do you have? He seems like a fun guy. And obviously, the real question from all of this, once you go around saying, like, yeah, the OT3 is canon, is when we get a new season, how evident is that going to be on screen?
One of the things you mentioned is, so one of the sort of fun episode types that they do on Leverage is they'll have these episodes where there are heavy flashbacks where our actors play the characters in the flashback. So there's one where the heist is around an interracial couple back in World War II.
In the flashback, our main characters will play the characters of the flashback. So we have Hardison and Parker playing the couple back in the past.
Yes, and similarly, there is the D.B. Cooper episode, which is great.
Yes, love D.B. Cooper.
Where in the flashback, there's a couple being played by Eliot and Parker. And so it'd be great in this new season if we had a similar flashback story where the couple is played by Eliot,
and Hardison. Because they're the only ones who haven't done it. And how fun would that be? I'm delighted by that idea. I hope John Rogers saw that one on Twitter or wherever I saw it. So yeah, super excited, ready for more. I hope he leans in to the ship because he likes to talk about it. So I guess that brings us to AO3 and our fanfic. As we've already discussed, this is not a super well-known property, ship, anything. So it does not appear on our AO3 top 100 ships of 2020. There are about 1,800-ish stories in the Parker, Hardison, Eliot ship. They are by far the most common ship of the Leverage tag. But then there also are some Nate and Sophie, and some Hardison Parker and some Eliot Parker and some Hardison Eliot. Just like
Right.
whatever, you know, all the the different options are there, but people are mostly shipping the OT3 here. So we both read, as we always do, the most kudos fic, which is something called Your Body is a War Zone, but You Are Not a Ruin by Postcard Mystery. And interestingly, this is, I won't say the first time because we had the weirdness of Hannibal.
Yeah.
But this is yet another short fic as the most popular, but it is not for general audiences.
Right. It's certainly not as fluffy.
Right. It's not as fluffy in terms of tone and subject matter, but also there is some sex in it, which we haven't had happen before as the most popular ship fic. So what were your thoughts?
So, I mean, I thought it was fine. I think as much as we haven't found something that's like, now I'm going to be hugely into fan fiction, I think I do prefer the ones that have like an interesting premise, which is, I think, a little counter to what we've been saying, right? If one of the reasons people write fan fiction is this very character driven, internal approach to storytelling, I think this really fits that because it really is all about Eliot's internal life and how he's feeling. But yeah, I don't know if it's the fluffiness overall, but my preference has been a little bit too like, oh man, they got to get bananas. Or like,
yeah, the bananas. That one sticks with you. That's the first one that we read. Yeah, I was actually sort of intrigued that this was the most kudos one because it's very sort of nebulous. You're kind of in Eliot's headspace for the whole thing. And it's just a collection of musings, you know, there's not really any plot that drives you. And I just was a little bit surprised.
Yeah.
So interestingly, I read it and felt it hadn't scratched my itch for Leverage fanfic. So I read a few more that I'll link these to, as we always link our fic, that I was delighted by. There is another one that I read that was actually thematically similar to this one, in that you're following Eliot and it's not even vignettes, but collections of moments throughout time. And it's Eliot's journey to understand his relationship with Parker and Hardison. So it's the interest to me of him is he has such low self-esteem, right? He thinks he's a terrible person. He obviously cares about them and wants to take care of them, but he can't comprehend them caring about him. So it's just like a collection of moments of them being nice to him and him waiting for the other shoe to drop of why this is happening. And so then by the end, he does come around to acceptance, which is nice. I just want somebody to hug Eliot, you know? He needs a hug. Mm-hmm. And I read a fun one that was basically Eliot has a nightmare. They're all like sleeping on couches after a job. They're all really tired. He has a nightmare. He wakes them up. And then they share, obviously, that they also have nightmares because they do really dangerous things as their job. And then Hardison shares that he has this, what he calls an apocalypse safe house that's just for the three of them. Like if the shit really goes down, the three of them, not even Nate and Sophie. Nate and Sophie don't know about this place. It will be just the place that they go, and he tells them about it, and it sounds lovely. They all have this daydream during the night about living in this South African small town where he's found this house for them. It's really sweet. And then another one that interested me for lots of reasons, but also because we were just talking about this, I can't remember when, but like the lack of asexual representation in fan fiction.
Right.
So I found this one that is about the three of them in a relationship, but at the beginning, Parker tells them that she doesn't like sex. Mm-hmm. And so the whole plot of it is they have had sex before, so they really freak out about it because first they worry they pressured her into it, then they worry that she had some traumatic incident that has made this happen or whatever, and she's sort of like trying to get into everyone's head. No, it's like nothing happened. I don't feel bad about what we've done, but I just wanted you to know it doesn't interest me. I'm not interested in it. And so then it felt to me really like the person who wrote it, these were their experiences. Like the conversations in it felt like they had had those conversations before, which I appreciated. And of course, by the end, everybody comes around and they figure it out. But it's just fun to see some representation.
I actually think probably at this point it was a little while ago when we were really talking about it, because I think it was maybe in the Good Omens episode.
Oh God, was it that long ago? That feels recent.
Talking about asexuality in fan fiction, but yeah, we couldn't get a handle on how frequently it appears. And so was that relatively high in the
It was.
kudos?
All of the
That's really
ones I'm
cool.
telling you about, I went, instead of looking at the kudos, I like to go over and look at the bookmarks.
Okay.
Because, like, the kudos fic is, you know, people read it and they are like, oh, thumbs up, I liked it. But then the bookmarked fic is like, I'm saving this for later in case I want to reread it. So every one that I'm talking about, I think, was on the first page of the book,
Okay.
most bookmarked fic.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, what we're gonna, I think, maybe get into now is really how unusual this, I was gonna say pairing. It's not really a pairing, but you get what I mean.
Does a pairing have to be two people?
I think a pair is technically two, but
Trio.
this, yes. Obviously, we said it's not very popular, but I think theoretically a portion of that is just that Leverage is not a very
Right.
popular show.
Yeah, I mean, you can't argue with that. But also, any pairing of three people is not common.
Yes.
You don't see a ton of that in mainstream shipping.
But then compared to our top 100, which we've referenced numerous times, and I think all of the ships we've covered have appeared on the top 100. Well, Lord of the Rings, not.
Oh, yeah, not Lord of the Rings. I didn't think it was all of them. But most of them. I mean, we've talked mostly about very mainstream popular for like properties and also pretty mainstream ships.
Right. But yeah, so this trio has some different elements which don't appear as frequently on our top 100 list, and let's talk about that a little bit more.
Well, if we're saying these things don't appear a lot, I guess that begs the question, what does appear a lot on our list? And you will find with some careful analysis, as we have done for you, what appears a lot is white guys. The list is chock full of white dudes. Tons and tons of white guy pairings. We did some, you know, statistical analysis on the list, and
just some light summaries.
40 of the 100 most popular ships are two white guys.
Yes.
Which, yeah, I think on its face will seem like an overrepresentation. But 68 of the ships on the list are male-male pairings, which also, right. I mean, that's its own discussion. But 40 of the 68, so almost 60% of the male-male ships are all white.
And what is making up the rest of those male-male ships, Maddie?
Well, a couple of things, but most notably, BTS. BTS by itself, the K-pop band, BTS, has 8 of the top 100 ships. So it is 12% of all the male-male ships. Mm-hmm. It is, like, kind of, really, there are a lot of angles at which to get into this. So the list is super white, as we've said. It's white top to bottom. Lots of white people on the list. We have just 20 ships on the list that have no white people in them, that are person of color / person of color. And of those, again, 8 are BTS.
Yeah.
There is a 9th that is from another
EXO.
K-pop group, EXO.
Yeah.
And then almost all of the rest of those are from different animes. So that's where we're getting almost all of our non-white representation. There is one of those 20 that is a ship from like a American scripted property. And that is Finpo, who are 89th on the list. That's right, people. You heard it. There is one person of color ship on this list from not K-pop and not anime.
Right. So on the one hand, thank God BTS exists, because imagine how white this list would be if it were not
BTS and anime
for them.
Are all of the non-white representation. So that what this also tells us is, in this list of person of color ships, there's one black guy.
Yeah, that is what that, and one Hispanic guy, right?
And one Hispanic guy.
I'm here for Asian representation too.
I mean, obviously neither of us is here to say we need less Asian representation on this list.
But I am maybe saying, guys, diversify the K-pop groups you're writing about, to my fellow carrots out there.
There are other bands than BTS. But what I'm saying is, if we need less of anything, it's white guys. We have so many freaking white guys on this list.
So yeah, we pulled some other numbers, right? So overall, 64 of the I think this is of like the slash fics are white slash fics. So that includes male, female, 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 male, male. Of the 36 non-white slash fics, again, 8 of those are BTS. So that's like 20% of all the POC
Wild.
slash fics. And we did find that there are 6 scripted American things with 1 non-white person.
Well, I mean, not if you're including Finpo. That's 2 non-white people.
At least 1 person of color.
And they are, yes, Finpo. I can't imagine the heavy lifting that this ship is doing for representation. We had no idea. Our other ones were, there's a Teen Wolf ship that I think is straight. I think it's Scott and Allison. Once Upon a Time is a femme/ship. The 100 is a femme/ship. Glee, Kurt and Blaine. And then we have Shadowhunters, which is the canon Alec and Magnus ship. But that's it, folks. There is not a lot, even, with a white person in the ship where we have people of color represented.
Yeah.
Even less representation. We're going down the list here. Things there should be more of. We've counted up, and boy, did it take some time to count them up. Yeah. All of the many femme/pairings on this list of the 100 most popular ships. Care to tell me how many there are on the list?
There are 3.
I'm sorry, did you say 30?
No, 3.
You said 3.
THREE. 3.
3 femme/ships in this list. We don't want to get into this too much because, spoiler alert, we are going to be talking about femme/ later on down the line. But it is just wild to think about how underrepresented femme/ships are. And honestly, just women are on this list because there are only 19, like, male-female ships on the list.
Yeah. Which, like, one of the arguments, right, around why there are so few women or potentially people of color, right, within fan fiction is that media itself doesn't give us complex people of color characters, complex women characters, which on the one hand is a little bit of a cop-out because one of the things that fan fiction can do is add complexity to an otherwise flat character.
But I do get the argument that there needs to be something there for you to latch on to.
Sure. But I think there are more than 6 female characters in things that people could get into.
Do you?
I think so.
Yeah, I mean, with 3 femme/ships and 19 male-female ones, we have 25 women of the 200 characters that are on this list. Well, not all characters, because some of them are real people, but 200 people. You're telling me that interesting female characters are that underrepresented on television?
I was going to say, to be fair, some of the men are repeats. We've got Kylo and Kylo.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there are plenty of repeats on this list. But yeah, there are lots of complicated things going into this, and we will dig into them more later, but it's something to think about why women are so underrepresented, because as we've talked about, there are not enough interesting people of color on screen, and that is contributing to there being less of them to ship. But there are, well, and as you also said, it's kind of hard to tell what the quote unquote right amount of representation for any type of person is if we were to have fan fiction that exactly resembled American society or something. But it's not hard to tell what that representation would be for women and men, because we know that there are more women than men.
Or at a minimum, most people are aware that about half the population.
About half. Right. And also we know that overrepresented among fan fiction writers are women. So it's not like they're unaware of the fact that we need representations of women in media.
Yes.
So a lot to dig into there.
But we'll get back to it.
We'll get back to it.
I think the other thing, right, that we've gone back to several times is this Finpo question.
Oh my god. This raised even more Finpo questions for me than we talked about originally.
Oh, we should also say, right, there's no poly relationships on this list either. So again, our OT3 that we're actually talking about this episode, not a common thing to ship.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the FinPo situation is interesting because you can't say what we said for Leverage for these Star Wars movies. It is not a thing that only a few people have seen and could be
Right.
writing fan fiction about. Everyone has seen
Everyone
the new
and their
Star Wars.
mother has watched those movies.
And not only are they 89th on the list, just overall, they are well below, and we mentioned this in the FinPo episode, Kylo and Hux.
I don't accept it. I cannot accept this ship. They are 33rd on the list of the 100 most common ships. For God's sake, why? What are people doing? Where did this come from? I don't tell, as I said to you earlier, someone who ships this, and yes, I'm calling out someone who actually ships this, come to me and tell me what Hux's characterization even is. Like, what about these characters is calling out to you that they need to be shipped together? Because I could tell you one, maybe two things about this guy.
Is one of them that he's a fascist and the other that he's a spy?
Yeah, those are the two. So what about this other than, and this is a big other than, the fact that they are Donald Gleason and Adam Driver is making people ship these characters?
Yeah, so it's really hard to walk away from this and not just be like, the driver of a lot of this activity is two hot white guys.
I mean, yeah, two hot white guys do seem to be the thing that greases the wheels of fandom.
Right.
Or the hot white guys. Because what other explanation is there for the fact that we have one person of color ship from all of these various, like, very popular pieces of big American media on this list? And why is it 50-something spots below goddamn Hux and Kylo?
And I think, right, this is in contrast to how we approach this podcast and our decision to, like, discuss this topic of, you know, we said in our intro that we have had the experience of you're watching something and you're like, these two characters are clearly emotionally invested in one another, and they seem to have a lot of sexual tension, and then this show or movie will not let them kiss. So from my perspective, right, the urge to ship comes from a place of what is in the text that I'm watching. You know, we talk about evidence and the things that we're picking up on and what's happening within the media. And, you know, it's fine that that's not always the case, and do whatever you like, and it's fan fiction, so it's whatever your taste is. But that doesn't seem to be the driver of the Kylo and Hux situation, because they do share some scenes. Sure. I wouldn't say there's any real emotional exchange or tension between them.
Nope. I would say what there is the presence of two white guys on screen together. And apparently that is irresistible to some corners of the fandom. Because I don't understand, if you're a person predisposed to writing fan fiction, say you're somebody who's always looking for new ships to produce content, right? You gotta produce some content. And you're looking around, who are some ships? Who are some guys? Because it's always got to be guys, because apparently the only thing people are interested in is guys.
Yeah.
But who are some guys that I could write some stuff about? And you watch these Star Wars movies, and you don't come out of them with the idea to write FinPo fic? How, though? Why did that happen?
And it's not like Oscar Isaac and John Boyega aren't also very attractive men. I mean...
duh! I would argue both more attractive than either of those other guys.
Yeah. I think particularly for a little while, everyone was obsessed with Oscar Isaac specifically. So, like, it's not the situation that we talked about with X-Men, right? Where initially you had two older actors who you might not be as into. These are young, very good looking men.
Guys with a lot of chemistry who are trying to get you to think that they're in a relationship, right? They're acting with the intention that you will see their chemistry. You know who probably was not doing that? Donald Gleason and Adam Driver.
I mean, I don't really know what Donald Gleason was doing throughout that trilogy. Like, he is a good
Not a
actor in
lot.
many, many things, but he is so weird and hammy. So this was a very interesting breakdown that we walked through. We hadn't really done it before, but
Gave
the
us a lot to think
OT3
about.
prompted us because, again, right, with our OT3, we have a woman, which is
Yep.
unusual.
Don't want that in your ship.
we have a black guy.
Don't want that in your ship.
And then we have the one white guy, but he's not, there's not another white guy necessarily. And, once again, just shout out to BTS and BTS shippers for really diversifying the list, because without them, we'd have nothing.
You look at the breakdown of white folks to non-white folks on the list, and you almost would think it's not as bad as I expected, right? Like, the amount of person of color ships is not like 3% or something. There's a fair amount of them, but then when you get into the breakdown, it's all BTS and it's all anime. And then you look at the list and you're like, well, there are like no Black and Hispanic people on this list. So where did they all go? Why don't they exist in these spaces?
I don't know. And similarly to the FemSlash thing, I fully understand and agree that there is not enough actual representation on television and in movies.
Yeah.
But there is more than what is showing up here.
And if we were looking for it, we would find it, right? Just a lot to think about this week.
I think we'll come back to these discussions and this question of white guys in later episodes as well. But yeah, once we started to really get into the numbers, it was shocking.
Shocking. All right. Well, I guess I don't know if we need to circle around to our usual questions.
I mean, we should. We got to ask the question.
Might as well. We can't not ask the question. So our usual question, is it queer baiting, queer coding, or queer canon?
It's queer canon. He said it was canon. It's pretty much in the show. Hopefully they make it more clearly canon.
As I learned from fan lore, I hadn't heard this phrase before when I went to look at this ship. They always, on the fan lore page, say if the ship is canon or not. And according to fan lore, this one is word of God canon. Meaning that you didn't like see him make out on the show or anything, but the showrunner says that it's canon, so guess it's canon.
Yep. And so I guess, right, if we get to season 6 and there's no clear evidence of it, it could be a little bit queer baiting.
Might inch back into queer baiting territory.
But I'm willing to give John Rogers the benefit of the doubt at this point. I don't know him to be a terrible asshole yet.
Not yet. There's still room. So I guess what we don't have to ask the question is, why isn't it canon? Because it is. And we don't have to rank the queer baiting on a scale of 1 to 5, because it ain't.
No. And we don't really have to ask the gender swap question either, because you already have a lady in the group.
Yeah.
But like, if you had to gender swap one of the characters in the OT3, who would you want to have
Eliot
gender swapped? Yeah.
Just because I like an ass-kicking lady. Eliot as a lady would be really cool. I mean, honestly, I'd gender swap Eliot and Hardison and make it a fem/trio. Can you imagine how cool
that as well?
These heist folks would be if they were all ladies?
I mean, that's pretty great.
I'm into it.
But I also don't mind gender swapping all of them and having a male thief.
Which actually is kind of fun because there is like a stereotypical femininity to her role because she's kind of
she's very much a cat burglar.
Yeah, a cat burglar, like where's her... I mean, she's not playing it for sexuality really, but there is an element of she's the one who would be wearing the cat suit and sneaking into the tight spaces and stuff. And so seeing that as a guy could be fun. So you touched on this a little bit earlier, but I have to ask, did this make you want to read more fan fiction?
Not really, but, you know.
See if any of the ones that I talked about interest you and maybe give those a go.
I'll take a look. But
that brings us to, what are we talking about next week? And actually, I think it's kind of thematically appropriate to what we just spent the last half of this episode talking about.
We're talking about 2 white guys.
We sure are.
Who, I don't know if we want to give it away, but maybe you're shipped because they're 2 white guys.
2 white guys. The power of 2 white guys is what we're talking about next week.
Specifically.
Yes.
OOQ from the most recent James Bond where Ben Whishaw shows up.
Yes. Ben Whishaw and Daniel Craig, OOQ. So, should be an interesting one. Again, come to us with comments, questions, concerns,
come to Maddie with why you ship Kylo and Hux and what's going on there.
Honestly, I challenge you. I defy you to give me your reasons. This is the relationship I want with you, is adversarial. But if you have anything to say to us, we can be reached at ltbkpod@gmail.com or on Twitter and Tumblr, also at ltbkpod. New episodes of the pod come out every other Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern, wherever you get your podcasts.